I've always been somewhat keen to the supernatural. I definitely opened up a door when I was 18 and used a Ouija board. We were all in the backyard of my friend's house. There were about 5 of us, and one of our friends had the glow-in-the-dark board. I was terrified, but intrigued. My mother is extremely religious and had always forbidden me to use one, so we sat there for a few minutes asking stupid questions and not really getting any answers. Well, it was a couple of minutes later when I could feel it. Something was there. My hands started to shake like crazy, and of course my friends started to make fun of me, but they didn't know what was going on. I started to hear deep breathing in one ear. I tried to tell myself that it was my friend McGann who was sitting next to me, but she was not close enough, nor was she breathing that hard. In my heat, I just said, "Go away, go away, go away," and eventually it did. I can't explain it to this day. It was weird because as it was happening, I didn't tell anyone. I was just sitting there silently freaking out. As we were all heading back home, I begged my friend Megan to sleep over because I knew whatever had breathed into my ear was going to follow me back. I asked Megan if she had heard deep breathing, and she was like, "No," and basically thought I was making it up. For the next month, I kid you not, my house was haunted. I could not sleep without the lights on and music in my ears. I would hear footsteps every night outside my door and periodically wake up at 3 a.m. After a month passed, my mother sat me down. "Ashley, what the hell is going on?" I did not tell her about using the board because I knew she'd be furious. "Oh, nothing, Mom. Nothing at all." "Ashley, you tell me what's going on. For the last month I've been hearing footsteps, and last night something scratched my foot." I just looked at her dumbfounded because I thought this was only affecting me. I basically broke down crying and told her everything. Together, we saged the house, said a few prayers, and it's amazing how different the house felt. I felt lighter and pleasant again. Since then, I have been predominantly more aware of ghosts. They usually come to me in my dreams. So, if you've ever wondered if Ouija boards work, they do. It might not seem like it's working, but you're literally opening a door, and they won't necessarily make themselves known on the board. And it turns out another guy had killed himself at the house where we used the board. So, I dabbled with the board as a kid, and nothing really happened. Then I saw The Exorcist, and decided I should probably stay away from the creepy board. Fast forward to when I was about 16. My brother had some friends over, and they wanted to play with the Ouija board. I wanted no part of it, so I went to bed. They were playing in the hallway outside my bedroom. I fell asleep, then suddenly I was awake because my TV turns on by itself. So, as I awoke, I turned to look at the TV, very surprised. Then, I turned back to look at my ceiling, and my poster comes off the wall and falls on top of me, like a slow fall. I had it taped to my wall. I guess it decided to stop working at that exact moment, after the TV came on by itself. The next day, I told my brother about it, and he said they had the lights turned off or something like that while they were playing, and it stopped. After that, I thought it was pretty creepy that it affected me, and I wasn't even playing. The other experience I had was in college, in my dorm. I got a knock at my door, and it was my buddy inviting me to come and play with them across the hall. They had a Ouija board, and a bunch of them were going to play it. I told them no way in hell. I warned them not to do it, but of course, nobody takes that advice. I just decided to go to sleep. That night, I had the most horrible dream of my life. I was at this festival, drinking and having a good time. I'm wandering to the outskirts of the festival, and I realize I see my grandmother's house right outside the gates. My grandma has been dead for years, but I spent a lot of time there as a child, so I have very fond memories of her and her kitty named Hobbs. So, I'm like, sweet, it's Grandma's house. I'm gonna have to go and say hi. I go into her house, and it's kind of dark and hard to see anything, but I can make out that she's across the room, and I greet her. "Hey Grandma, how you doing?" I shout to her. She's sitting in the living room with her back to me, and she tells me to come over. So I walk over and sit down on this ottoman that she's sitting on, still with her back to me, so we're looking off as we're conversing. I'm asking her how she's been as I'm looking around the house, as I'm talking with my back to her. Hobbs, the kitty, jumps onto my lap, and I start to pet the kitty as I'm looking around the room, talking. Then her voice gets raspy, and she says in a dark tone, "I'm so glad I've got you here." And so, I finally turn to her, and I'm like, "What do you mean? Got me in here, Grandma?" And that's when I see her. It's not my grandma. It's this demon-looking, ghoulish thing in my grandma's clothes. So I'm like, "Oh my God," and look down in my lap. The kitty isn't a cat at all, but a huge rat. And just as I see the rat on my lap, I start to freak out and wake up in a cold sweat with my heart pounding. It was the most horrible dream I've ever had. I'm convinced now that spirits can get into your dreams. It just seems so weird that I had such a vivid, horrible dream as they were playing with that stupid board across the hall. I just wanted to get the hell out. In 1996, when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me, she decided that she wanted to play the Ouija board with her sister. My grandmother died about 3 months beforehand, and they wanted to see if they could contact her. My mom and aunt say that they had talked to what they thought was their mother, who tragically died in that house 3 months prior. They spoke for about 30 minutes until the planchette made a sharp movement, and the air went ice cold. The planchette was moving very fast on the board as it kept repeating, "Mine, mine, mine." This really scared my mom, so they stopped the session. A few weeks later, my mom goes into labor. At the time, this scared my mom because I was a month and a few weeks early. When I was born, I was so small that I had to stay in the hospital for 2 more weeks. All was well when my mom and I left. Fast forward to when I was 4. I started getting horrible night terrors of me sitting on the top of the stairs in my house. In the dream, you could tell that it was daytime, but it was still dark. My feet were stuck to the floor like it was quicksand, and I would scream and scream for what felt like hours. At the end of the dream, I would always be able to see something crawling up me slowly. It was very skinny, long-limbed, this black creature with extremely long fingers and darker fingernails that were even longer. His eyes were a big burning red. I would get this dream so often that when this creature would start to appear, I would be able to wake myself up. These dreams were quite an often occurrence, almost every night. I told my mom about it, and she told me that I shouldn't stay up late and scare myself with stories. My mom's attitude definitely started to change when my little sister started saying creepy things. At this time, my sister was 2.5 years old and very smart. One night, my sister and I were in my room getting tucked in at the end of the night. Every night, my sister and mom played a little game before bed. My mom would tell my sister to spell a word, and my sister would spell it, and she would get a prize. As my mom said goodnight to us, my sister says, "Mommy, can you spell black man? Better run." She said this in the most sing-song horror movie kind of way. That night, I woke up to something very odd. An old lady at the end of my bed. Honestly, she looked so real I thought a real old lady was in my room. I screamed, turned on the light, and she wasn't there. Totally creeped out, and I remember keeping the light on as I couldn't sleep in the dark anymore. It was too paralyzing. All of a sudden, I woke up in the darkness again. I didn't even remember closing my eyes to sleep, and there was that old woman at the edge of the bed. This time, I knew she wasn't human. She had blue skin, rotting teeth. Her eyes were an unnatural blue, and she was just staring at me, smiling. And she began to laugh. It started with a small giggle, and then she started cackling. She laughed so hard that she threw her head back, acting like a mental patient. I was in such shock. I couldn't even cry. My mouth was agape. And after a while, she was laughing so much her mouth was getting larger. It unhinged like that of a snake. And then suddenly, mid-laugh, she stops, snaps her head back, and in a very fast and low man's voice says, "If you're scared, cover your head, little piggy, because I'm not gonna stop." I did that right away. I covered my face in my blankets, and right away she began laughing again. I laid there for what felt like hours under my blanket, scared to death. Finally, I awoke. Daylight now. After this happened, I told my mom, and she called my grandpa, who was a pastor. He came over, blessed the house, and everything was okay for the most part. One thing happened after a while when I was a teenager. Then, after I got older, I moved downstairs and got my own bedroom, and my sister stayed upstairs. Every night, without a doubt, I would always wake up at 4:30 a.m. I would hear creaking down my stairs, footsteps, and I would hear these footsteps all the way to my door, to my room. Then, my door would slowly open. No one would ever be there, and after a minute or two, it would slowly close. After my entire childhood of living there, we finally moved. I was 17 and had not noticed anything creepy besides the door in years. One night, my mom, sister, and I were all on her bed watching TV. It was June, and that day we had horrible thunderstorms. The storms got so bad that the power went out, and we all decided to go to sleep because it was getting late anyway. Then, all three of us woke up at the exact same time. It's still dark, and it's very cold, considering the fact that it was summer and the AC was off. Then, all three of us gasped as we see at least a 7-foot-tall figure right in the bedroom doorway. Suddenly, I hear that laugh that I'd heard so many years ago. I knew who it was. Then, the creature whispers something to us, something that is burnt into my memory. I found you. My entire body was in shock. He found us, the black man. Then he vanished like he was never there. Nothing happened after that for years. That is until I moved to Florida with my then boyfriend, now husband. My husband worked third shift, so I always found myself not being able to sleep at night. I went out one night around 1 a.m. to smoke a joint. I have a very small house with a small front yard. I was planning on smoking fast and running inside. As I finished my joint and started walking, I noticed a long black arm with black claws stretching down from the roof, like something was going to grab my hair. It wasn't human. I told my husband, and he responded that he was worried about my health. That is, until he saw the black thing on top of the roof. That was the other day. Can anyone tell me why he's on my roof? I'm just wondering when he's gonna try and come inside. An experience with a Ouija board, which, despite being very skeptical, I can't fully explain away. Years ago, my best friend, another friend, and 3 girls were at one of the girls' houses for Halloween. We were just going to spend the afternoon and evening chillin' and watching horror movies. During the afternoon, the girl whose house it was says that she has a Ouija board and that we should play with it. All 3 girls were really excited to do it. My best friend is kind of superstitious and very reluctant. Myself and the other friend are kind of skeptical but indifferent about doing it, as it seemed pointless. Even more so when she brought it out and it was some kind of shitty thing she'd made by herself with a bit of wood and a marker pen, and one of her daddy's whiskey glasses as a planchette. But we were teen girls, and they inevitably got their way. My superstitious friend still wants no part, but the other 5 of us are starting to play. The grimly predictable happens, and it starts spelling things out like show boobs, almost as if one of the guys was forcing the glass when we had our fingers on it. Me and the other guy found this hilarious. The girls just got annoyed that we weren't taking it seriously, so we all agreed to do it properly. After a bit of random twitching, it starts going 5 no, 6 yes, repeatedly. We took this, that it meant it wanted the guy who wasn't joining in to join. Note: everyone said at the time and afterwards that they weren't forcing it, now, and the rational part of me assumes that they were. I'm not sure. After much persuasion, the 3rd guy joins us. Again, there's a period of a few random letters or twitching, but nothing coherent. Then it starts repeating a sequence of 3 letters and some numbers over and over again. Suddenly, the guy that joined jumps back out of instinct. We all do the same. The glass falls over and is all steamed up with a cross scratched on the inside. The girls kind of freaked out. I explained the glass obviously steamed up because of how we spent a long time with 6 teenage hands on a cold, upturned glass. It's called condensation, and is far from supernatural. The cross was probably a pre-existing flaw in the glass, a dishwasher scratch we didn't notice before but became more apparent when the glass had steamed up. Anyway, Guy 3 is now very quiet, definitely not playing again. So we stick a movie on instead. Shortly after, he goes home, clearly not his usual self. The next day, he calls me and asks if I'll go somewhere with him. We get a train a few towns over, and he explains on the way. I knew prior to any of this that his dad had run out on him and his mom when he was a baby, and he had no contact with that side of the family, knowing only who they were from photo albums. On the journey, he fills in the gaps. His surname is obviously his dad's. His parents were married, now divorced, and he never changed it to his mom's. His middle name was a family tradition on his father's side, and he had an uncle who died in a motorcycle crash a few weeks before he was born. He knew nothing but his first name and about the accident from going through the photos with his mom. "Oh, that's your uncle. Whatever. He died before you were born." Anyway, the 3 letters were his uncle's initials. It took a while of him repeating them, but it clicked, obviously. At some point, the sequence contained 2 of the 3 initials, registered. Then it hit him. The 3rd one was his uncle's first name initial. He'd asked his mom about it when he got home, but she had little to add. He didn't really know, and we were now on a train to make our way to the cemetery where his uncle was buried, so that he could see if he could make any sense of the numbers. His mom knew the cemetery from the funeral, but since the divorce, hadn't been there. He had never been there before. Note, at this point, the steam and the cross, the bits everyone else found spookiest. I was sure, whereas per my explanation, and maintain this stance to this day, despite this next bit. I was now thinking maybe everyone else was in on it. Maybe he'd been more curious about his dad's side of the family now that he was older and had visited the grave recently, and they had all conspired to try and scare me. One of, if not all of the others, forcing the 5 no, 6 yes bit, and him reluctantly joining. The steam and cross were still, per my explanation, and just a fortunate coincidence. And now, we're on our way to some pre-planned big reveal at the graveyard, which would, in their plan, scare my pants off. We get to the graveyard, wander around the ages trying to find the grave, and eventually find it and the mysterious string of numbers that followed the 3 letters, with a chapter and verse of 2 biblical inscriptions on 2 stones. I have to admit that we're not already onto their little scheme. That would have been pretty clever. I turned to my friend to high-five him and compliment him on what would have been a very clever ruse had I not figured it out. To see him sitting on the ground, staring at the grave, then start sobbing. Literally just sat there with tears streaming down his cheeks. Now, this guy can lie, and he can prank, and my rationalization of everything else anyone claims to be supernatural would make me the gold standard target for a spooky Halloween prank. But one thing he cannot do is act. He was obviously and genuinely upset. I just went and sat by him. We sat there for ages, and just went home in silence. This was in the mid-90s. He's still my best friend. Randomly over the years, I've pestered him to do another Ouija board with me, as I'm curious now, as he's the only one I've ever had anything vaguely resembling a result from. He always declines. He won't talk about what happens. Not as in the silent treatment, but simply changes the subject. However, not long after that event, he did start to track down that side of the family. He's reconciled with his father and met his half-brothers, etc. Hey there, this is Joe. Hope you enjoyed these true creepy stories. They say majority of the viewers aren't subscribed. Help me continue to build this incredible community by subscribing. I'd love to have you be a part of it, especially if you love scary stories. See you next time.